first learn how to tackle one of the tougher pathways project listed, that is creating a podcast. What's your message? Who can hear it? One of the best digital media options available today is a podcast, an independent podcast where you control the access and the content. And how do you get started? What do you need? What will it cost? Let's start with the basics in today's session, Podcast Like a Pro. Kim Krajci has been podcasting about Toastmasters since 2014. This doesn't make her podcast the oldest podcast on Toastmasters, but Toastmasters 101 is one of the top ranked Toastmasters podcasts in the podcasting world. Sometimes even beating Toastmasters International podcast. Our district has been sponsoring this podcast right from the beginning. So she would like to thank all of you for making Toastmasters 101 happen. So ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome distinguished Toastmasters Kim Krajci.
Thank you, Preeti. I'm here because you pay for it, and I want to thank you, because without you, I wouldn't have a podcast. I decided to podcast in 2013, and I wrote a proposal to our trio and said, this is what I'd like to do. And they very graciously said, sure, Kim, do whatever you want, which is always a bad thing to say to me. However, I created a podcast about Toastmasters at that time, and it was about how to get your DTM. Now that pathway to the DTM has since closed. However, I've started a new podcast called Toastmasters 101, which is kind of an introduction to Toastmasters and the Pathways program. But we don't just talk about how to get started. We talk about more advanced topics such as podcasting like a pro. So let's talk about that today. But let's talk about it from a project perspective, because let's face it, if you don't know if you want to podcast, you're not going to want to put a lot of money into it. So let's talk about the starter budget. Why should you podcast? Not everybody's going to be Joe Rogan, who got $100 million from Spotify for unique content that would only be published on their platform. He's already regretting that. No, you want a podcast because it's your personal platform and it's your message. That's what you want to get across. And we're seeing people whose voices are not being permitted to be shared very freely right now. For whatever reason, we want to make sure that your voice and your message get heard. When you podcast, you get perceived to be an expert or a leader in the field, whatever your field is. You have the option of marketing yourself or your product to people. Then there's that little bit of thrill when you get asked to be on somebody else's podcast. I got to tell you, I love it when that happens. Mostly people who podcast say you get to meet people in your field who you would never get the time of day from in the past if it weren't for your podcast. Now, exactly what is a podcast? Can I see a show of hands? How many of you have actually listened to a podcast in the past 24 hours? I see a couple of hands. Okay. A podcast technically is a recording that's an audio or video that is posted online for other people to see. That's the key component of being a podcaster. You have to post it somewhere. You can't just record it and say that you're a podcaster. So if you want to do this particular project, you have to post it somewhere. So we're going to talk about that later in this presentation. But be prepared. You're going to get out there. Let's talk about these questions. How do we record? What equipment do you need? What software do you need? Where can you post the recording? And the big one, how much is it going to cost me? before we get to any of those questions, we first need to talk about what's your topic. Now, if you go to the Toastmasters International training for Create a Podcast, it suggests making a podcast about Toastmasters. I am not telling you that you shouldn't make a podcast about Toastmasters. There are a lot of people who are doing that. However, maybe I don't want the competition. Maybe it's because you're more passionate about something else. You should podcast about something that you love, because there are days when it gets hard, and we want you to have a successful, fun experience. And you're not going to do that if you're talking about Toastmasters when you'd much rather be talking about raising your parrot, because there are people out there who want to learn more about having parrots. And those are the people who you know want your content. The next thing that the project talks about is deciding your format, and they suggest 3. They suggest informational, they discuss interviews, or, that is really such a small box that Toastmasters has put podcasting in, because podcasting is so much bigger than that. Podcasting can be anything. You've got storytelling, you've got gossip, you've got makeup, you've got how to repair your car. There are podcasts about all of those things out there. You shouldn't try to limit yourself. Now, there is the 3 guys, 1 brain type of podcast. This is a professional term, don't use it lightly, where they sit around drinking beer and record themselves talking about football, video games, or video games about football. If that's what you want to do, that's just fine. Don't let me stop you. It's a whole genre. You can do interviews. Your format is up to you, but don't think you have to do what you hear somebody else do. This is your voice. This is your message. You do it the way you want. Finally, you get to create your content, and that can be anything you want it to be. And I mean that literally. There's porn podcasts. I know one of them. He's a nice guy. Just don't understand him, but he's a nice guy. You get to create your content, whatever it is you want to create. And if you're looking for something that isn't out there, you can be sure that there are other people who want it too. This is the podcast organizer worksheet that comes from Toastmasters International. I find this to be a very effective tool. So when you're planning your content, when you're thinking about how you want to put together a podcast, this is a very useful tool. And I think that I would have used this when I was starting, because I thought it was so logical. Now, there are a lot of them out there, a lot of podcast planners. So if this one doesn't work for you, you can go out there and find others. How do you record it? What equipment do you need? First of all, you need some kind of recording device. I've put up here a picture of a computer that's a laptop. You can use any kind of computer. You can also use any kind of recording device, but you will need to be able to edit it at some point during your podcasting journey. You're going to need a good microphone. I'm going to stop sharing a minute because I want to introduce you to the right microphone. Do you see my microphone? I can't hear any of you. I'm assuming you do. This is my microphone. This is a Samson Q2U. This is the microphone you want. It doesn't have to be on this thing, but you definitely want a microphone like this. The next thing you need is a pair of headphones. Now, quite honestly, you don't need to have any particular brand of headphones. Anything will do. You can get the cheap ones from Big Lots. That's what I do. And finally, the last thing you're going to need is some sort of recording software so that you can edit your work and then you can upload it to the platform that you want to put it on. Now, I just showed you my Samson Q2U. That is a great microphone for a lot of reasons. First of all, it is extremely inexpensive. This microphone, and Okay, inexpensive is a relative term when you've got a laptop that you don't need to spend any money on. Why am I telling you to not use your laptop to record? Mostly because the sound is not very good. A good microphone is going to be 2 to 3 inches away from your face. It is very hard to talk into a laptop microphone 2 or 3 inches away from your face because you're going to keep banging into it. It's just not going to work. A laptop microphone is built on certain standards, and one of those is not clarity. It's going to pick up a lot of sound in the rest of your room, and that's very, very distracting for somebody who is listening to it. Now, your headphones don't matter so much. Headphones can be earbuds. They can be the cheap stuff from Big Lots. You can spend thousands of dollars on it. The average podcast is listened to a person in a car. They've got the sound of the engine. They've got the beeping of the various alerts in their car. It's not so important how you are listening when you're doing your editing, but you want to be able to hear yourself clearly. Please do not use a microphone that is attached to a headset. A lot of people think that you're going to kill two birds with one stone, but now I'm going to tell you a secret and you're going to pay attention to the rest of this conversation. You can hear me breathing, and I sound like an obscene phone caller when I've got a microphone like this. Go for a separate microphone and a separate headset just to avoid that problem. Now, can you use your smartphone? There are a lot of people who do. They record directly into it. They hold it up to their face just like they do a phone call, and they do a recording like that. That is possible. Am I going to say that it's best? To be really honest with you, some of my best recordings have been done with my tablet, sitting in a person's car, because that was the best ambiance I could get. So don't look away from the obvious options like a cell phone, but don't go to a laptop. It's a really poor choice and you won't like what you get. Finally, you need a software program to do your editing and recording with. And I'm going to recommend to you a program called Audacity. I'm recommending it for a couple of reasons. Number one, it's free. Number two, it works on all platforms, whether Apple or PC. So you really want to look into getting Audacity and using it. Any software program you use is going to have a learning curve, but you can use it and use this well. If you want to get into podcasting, let me recommend this resource, the School of Podcasting. Dave Jackson lives in Cuyahoga Falls. He lives in District 10. He is the owner of School of Podcasting. He's been running this program, podcast now for over 15 years. He is an award-winning podcaster who is in the Podcasting Hall of Fame. He will teach you how to get started, how to grow, and how to monetize. However, you don't have to pay for it. You can just listen to his podcast. Go to schoolofpodcasting.com and you can find him. I am recommending him in particular because he has been my mentor, and he also loaned me the equipment today for me to do this because my equipment got burned up in a power surge on Christmas Day, and I wouldn't be here without him. So now you've recorded and edited your podcast, and yes, you must edit. You're going to hate me for saying that, and it's going to be hard to learn because learning curves are always hard, but you'll always be better for it. You're not less real for editing, but you can take content that is okay and make it spectacular with a few edits. After you do that, what do you do now? You upload your file. Now, this is the part where people start going, I don't know that I want to put this out there, and what's it going to cost? So let me suggest to you these 4 options. Preeti is going to send a file out that will have links to all of the things that I recommend. Podbean, Spreaker, Buzzsprout, and Anchor all provide a free platform. It's extremely limited, but you can use it. Now, the question that I know you're all thinking about right now is, how do you get that $100 million from Spotify like Joe Rogan did? Well, Joe Rogan has had some kind of media presence for over 15 years. That's how he got that. Until you've been around for 15 years, and even then, I'm not going to guarantee you $100 million from Spotify. There are ways to monetize your podcast, and you can learn more about those from a book called Profit from Your Podcast, conveniently by the Dave Jackson of the School of Podcasting. You really want to look into this book if you want to find ways to make money from podcasting. He covers sponsorships, commercials, Patreon, consulting, lots of ways that are not obvious. You might think you want to sound like NPR, and when you're done with your first podcast, you're not going to sound like NPR. In fact, that's a good thing. This is your voice. This is your message. This is what Toastmasters is all about, helping you to develop these. Don't try to sound like somebody else. Be yourself and be a podcaster. Try Project 4. You'll enjoy it. Thank you, Preeti.
Thank you so much, Kim. I think at least half of us will now attempt that project. We were like, we see it, it looks, glamorous, but we never dared to step in. So now we have some information on trying. And whoever tries it first, please let us know. We would love to see who took this initiative and actually went for the project.